The United States government currently owes $37 trillion in debt, a figure larger than any nation has ever carried in human history. To put this into perspective, it exceeds the total global economic output of just 2 decades ago. And here's the reality that almost no one is talking about. The government is not planning to pay this debt back in any conventional sense. They are planning to erase it through a methodical, strategic devaluation of the US dollar, effectively stealing purchasing power from everyone who holds dollars. This is not default, it is not austerity, and it is not tax hikes. This is a quiet, invisible transfer of wealth from ordinary citizens to the government and its strategic allies, executed through the manipulation and revaluation of hard assets. Gold and Bitcoin. The United States is quietly building a parallel financial system, accumulating strategic reserves in these assets and preparing to revalue them at multiples of today's market prices. By doing so, they can technically offset unpayable debt on the balance sheet while simultaneously devaluing the currency in circulation. Every dollar you hold will lose real value. Every bond will become virtually worthless in purchasing power terms, and savings accounts will evaporate in real terms. This is not theory. It has a historical precedent. Government debt is fundamentally different from household debt. When an individual owes money, repayment requires real resources, selling assets, working more hours, cutting spending. Governments, on the other hand, control the currency. They can redefine what a dollar is worth, revalue assets on their balance sheet, and erase debt without paying a single cent. This process, called a monetary reset, has happened repeatedly throughout history. Consider 1933, when the United States was drowning in debt following World War I and the Great Depression. The debt-to-GDP ratio was around 40%. The economy was collapsing, and deflation was destroying wealth. President Franklin Roosevelt took radical action. He confiscated gold from Americans at the old official price of $20.67 per ounce and then revalued it to $35 per ounce overnight, a 69% increase. The U.S. government, which held most of the nation's gold, suddenly increased the value of its reserves by $2.8 billion. Debt that had been 40% of GDP was reduced to 25% in just 5 years, while ordinary citizens who turned in gold lost purchasing power and were legally barred from reclaiming it. Fast forward to today, the United States owes $37 trillion, and the debt-to-GDP ratio stands at 132%, the highest in history outside of World War II. Interest payments alone already exceed $1.2 trillion per year, more than the combined budgets of defense or Medicare, and if interest rates remain at 5%, these payments could rise to $1.8 trillion by 2027, 6% of GDP, before a single dollar of principal is paid. It is mathematically impossible to pay this debt down using conventional means. Tax hikes, spending cuts, or economic growth cannot keep up with the rapidly growing debt. The only feasible solution is devaluation. However, the government cannot simply print money. Doing so openly would trigger panic, spike inflation, and collapse confidence in the dollar. They need a more sophisticated method, something that looks like policy rather than theft. Enter Bitcoin and gold. In January 2025, President Trump signed an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve. The official narrative was that the U.S. needed to lead in digital assets to avoid falling behind China and other nations in cryptocurrency adoption, framing it as a matter of national security. The reality, however, is far more strategic. The Treasury now has authority to acquire, hold, and manage Bitcoin as a reserve asset, effectively creating a tool for debt elimination through revaluation. The U.S. government already holds approximately 210,000 Bitcoin seized from criminal enterprises, valued at roughly $21 billion at current market prices. But the long-term target is far higher. Legislation proposes acquiring 1 million Bitcoin over the next 5 years. Unlike purchasing on the open market, which would inflate prices, the Treasury plans to acquire Bitcoin through seizures, fines, and possibly government mining operations, quietly accumulating a massive reserve before revaluing it. Meanwhile, the United States officially holds 833 tons of gold, roughly 261 million ounces. On paper, the statutory price is $42.22 per ounce, a relic of 1973. Market value today is 2,800 per ounce, making the actual reserves worth 731 billion. This creates enormous revaluation potential. When gold is revalued, even partially backing the dollar, the government can increase the official balance sheet value of its holdings to 5.2 trillion, creating trillions of dollars of virtual wealth to offset debt, while destroying the purchasing power of the currency in circulation. When Bitcoin is revalued to 1 million per coin and gold to 28,000 per ounce, the U.S. government can technically reduce the real burden of debt from 37 trillion to roughly 12 trillion, without ever paying a single dollar. But for the average American, the impact is devastating. The dollar loses 70–90% of its real purchasing power. Inflation spikes, food prices triple, energy prices quadruple, rent soars, and wages fail to keep pace. The economy enters stagflation, unemployment rises, the middle class is devastated, and real living standards collapse. This is not just domestic policy. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, have been preparing for a global monetary reset for years. They are frustrated with U.S. dollar dominance and the inflation exported by U.S. monetary policy, and they have been stockpiling gold in massive quantities. China, for example, officially holds 2,300 tons, but analysts estimate 4,000–6,000 tons. Russia holds 2,300 tons, India 80–40 tons, and these countries continue to buy more. When the U.S. revalues gold, it will ripple globally, effectively resetting the value of debt and reserves worldwide. Though not explicitly coordinated, the alignment is implicit. Governments face unpayable debt, and the solution is the same: devaluation through strategic asset revaluation. The timeline is already visible. 2025 marks the accumulation phase. The U.S. quietly acquires Bitcoin while promoting the narrative of gold backing and sound money. 2026 is the crisis phase, when debt and budget conflicts intensify. The bond market shows stress, yields spike, and the government gains justification for extraordinary measures. By 2027, the revaluation phase begins. Bitcoin is officially valued at 1,000 million per coin for balance sheet purposes. Gold is revalued to 28,000 per ounce, and the public is told this is stabilizing policy. Markets follow, the dollar collapses, inflation explodes, and the middle class suffers massive real losses. Between 2028 and 2030, the market stabilizes at these new levels. Bitcoin at 500,000 to 800,000, gold at 15,000 to 18,000, and the dollar at a permanently lower purchasing power. The government has successfully erased 25 trillion in real debt while preserving its political and monetary power. Winners in this scenario are the government, early Bitcoin holders, early gold investors, foreign governments with significant reserves, and wealthy individuals with productive assets. Losers are savers, retirees on fixed incomes, bondholders, pension funds, wage earners, renters, and small businesses. Historical parallels abound: Weimar Germany in the 1920s, Argentina in multiple decades, Zimbabwe in the 2000s, and Venezuela in the 2010s all destroyed public wealth through currency devaluation while erasing government debt. The pattern is universal: governments in crisis preserve power and survive, citizens lose wealth. The U.S. is following the same script today, rebranded as strategic reserve revaluation and gold-backed dollar restoration. What was once theft is now policy. Individuals have a narrow window to protect themselves. Step 1: exit dollar-denominated assets. Bonds and cash are vulnerable. Holding dollars or government securities will result in a 70% loss of real purchasing power. Step 2: acquire hard assets. Physical gold is a 5,000-year proven store of value. Bitcoin is digital gold with upside potential. And real estate that generates income, or commodities in energy, agriculture, or industrial metals will appreciate with inflation. Step 3: reduce debt. High-interest personal loans and credit card balances must be eliminated. Fixed-rate mortgages at low rates may be held, but adjustable-rate debt or high-interest loans should be repaid. Step 4: diversify internationally. Open foreign bank accounts, acquire property in stable countries, and hold investments in non-dollar currencies to hedge against domestic currency collapse. Step 5: build skills and community. In a world where currency collapses, your ability to produce value, repair, trade, and cooperate locally becomes far more important than cash holdings. A practical roadmap emerges week 1. Start purchasing gold. Scaling to 10-20% of net worth. Week 2. Acquire Bitcoin. Targeting 5-15% of net worth. Week 3. Evaluate and liquidate vulnerable bonds. Week 4. Reduce cash holdings to operational necessity. Month 2. Expand international diversification. Month 3. Develop skills, networks, and access to productive resources like land. Time is critical. The 2025 accumulation phase is the last safe window to position before crisis. If you act now, you preserve wealth. If you wait, you risk being destroyed by a 2027 revaluation event. This is not speculation or conspiracy. The U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio, the interest burden, and the executive orders establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve are public, verifiable facts. Central banks are buying gold at record rates. China and Russia are reducing dollar exposure. BRICS nations are preparing alternative payment systems, and global financial actors are positioning for a post-dollar world. All indicators point to a deliberate policy: erase debt through currency devaluation. This is legal, deliberate, and intentional. The government is choosing to sacrifice public wealth to preserve power, exactly as it has in past monetary crises. The choice is clear. You can accept the narrative, trust that everything is fine, and watch your savings evaporate. Or you can act now, preserve wealth in hard assets, diversify internationally, reduce debt, and build productive skills and networks. The strategic Bitcoin reserve is not about innovation. Gold-backed dollar discussions are not about sound money. Both are about creating the conditions to devalue the dollar and eliminate $37 trillion in debt. The 2027 reset is coming, and positioning now will determine whether you survive financially or lose everything.